Notorious B.I.G. and Sean Combs got up to leave, Perez called Mac and told Mac they were going to their cars. He said he received a call from Mac about 5 minutes later, telling him to get out of the way. And he said that's when all hell broke loose.
An inmate's claims resulted in the LAPD being ruled by a judge to pay a penalty of $1.1 million to the estate of late rapper Biggie Smalls. The ruling had come after Officer Stephen Katz, who had been tasked with heading the investigation of the unsolved case, had been found as locking hundreds of documents of the inmate's claims away in his desk. The inmate had gone as far as claiming that members of the LAPD had visited him in prison where they threatened he would be shanked if he continued to speak publicly.
They came to visit me prior to me giving evidence at the Board of Vice hearing. And they made it perfectly clear they didn't want me to testify. The Los Angeles Police Department threatened me with physical violence. They threatened to have me stabbed in prison. And I knew they were going to do whatever they could to shut me up.
The inmate claimed to have been the former cellmate of LAPD Rampart officer Rafael Perez, who had been arrested in 1998 after being caught stealing out the evidence locker. Rafael Perez had been listed as a defendant in a wrongful death lawsuit against the LAPD by Biggie's family. His cellmate had been sought after to testify in a civil trial after claiming Rafael Perez had exposed to him the LAPD's alleged plot against Biggie. In this video, we're going to uncover the inmate's claims throughout his several different prison interviews, where he had gone on to lay out the alleged LAPD conspiracy behind the Biggie case.
My name is Kenneth Bogney. I'm currently housed in the California State Prison. I have 40 years to life under the California 3 strikes law for burglary.
Kenneth Bogney had been a Major League Baseball prospect who had broken the 3 strikes law in California. Bogney was sentenced to 40 years in prison under burglary charges and had served time in 3 different California prisons. Bogney was a non-violent offender and explained his circumstances in a 2017 Fox documentary Who Shot Biggie and Tupac.
Hello, this is Kenneth.
Tell me how you met Rafael Perez.
Well, I have a brother that's in law enforcement. And when I came to jail, they housed me with people who were involved with law enforcement, and Rafael Perez just happened to be in that unit.
Kenneth in the documentary claimed to have had a brother who had been in law enforcement, and when he had been processed after being arrested, he had gone on to have been housed with former law enforcement inmates. Kenneth Bogney had also become a police informant known as a jailhouse informant. There are at least 9 documented removal orders from prison for Kenneth Bogney to testify in Board of Rights hearings for the LAPD as a police informant. Kenneth would mostly testify in the hearings on the behalf of the police. Bogney, in working as a police informant, would be subjected to polygraph tests to back the testimony, to which he had passed each one he had carried out. Bogney's testimony had gone on to exonerate over 5 police officers in different cases. Bogney had spent time in protective custody with former LAPD Rampart cop Rafael Perez. Officer Perez had been sentenced to 5 years in prison but had only served a year, after being caught stealing out the evidence locker in 1998.
The scandal now tearing at the criminal justice system was launched by the confessions of a former cop, Rafael Perez. Charged with stealing and selling 8 pounds of in 1998, Perez has implicated himself and other officers in order to reduce a possible 14-year sentence.
Bogney had spent upward of 4 months as Perez's cellmate before being rehoused just 2 cells away. Bogney claimed to have become friendly with Perez during this time and had spent a total of 8 months in the same prison together. He claimed they would both eat breakfast together and go to church together.
I shared a cell with Rafael Perez for approximately 4 months. But I was housed with Rafael Perez for approximately 8 months. We became friends. We ate together. We did everything. We read books together. We prayed together. I believe he just wanted somebody to talk to.
Bogney had told LAPD officer Cliff Armas in November of 2000 how Perez was alleged to have told him how LAPD Rampart cops were alleged to have been behind the murder of Biggie. He had further told the officer that Perez was alleged to have told him how the Rampart cops had worked security for Death Row Records. Bogney would speak on this in a 2017 Fox documentary.
He was like, I was working security for Death Row Records with Mac.
The inmate's claims would further unravel the alleged double life of disgraced LAPD cop Rafael Perez and his cop associates of the Rampart Division, who had gone on to become implicated in one of the worst police corruption scandals in United States history. Rafael Perez was a former Marine who had enlisted in the LAPD in 1989. Perez first became a probationer in the Harbor Division. He had then worked patrol in the Wilshire Division. Rafael Perez's police partner had been LAPD officer David Mack. Rafael Perez and David Mack had been undercover partners for the West Bureau's spy team. LAPD detective Russell Paul got on reports that they were alleged to have been robbing dealers while on duty.
He got caught up with Mac and them because I remember the first time he told me when he took money from Mac. The first time he committed a crime, so to speak, is when he took some money off a drug dealer. Because, he was in narcotics first.
In October of 1993, while working in a division, Mack and Perez had killed Jesse Vecino of the Clanton 14th Street Gang. Mack had been awarded the Medal of Bravery honor based on Rafael Perez's testimony after Mack had shot Jesse Vecino 13 times, killing him. Witnesses at the scene had claimed the shooting had been unprovoked, whereas Perez had testified it was carried out in self-defense. The classified FBI files on the case of Biggie Smalls contain a redacted version of the incident, which states Perez had detailed he owes his life to David Mack following the incident and had idolized him. A woman by the name of Sonia Flores had told the FBI that she had become Perez's mistress, meeting him in 1991. She had told the FBI she had gone to the Pan American nightclub on the same street as the LAPD metro station, where Perez had been on patrol looking for underage drinkers. Sonia, who was 14 at the time, had been discovered by Rafael Perez, to which she had told the FBI that they had begun dating, although he was 24 at the time. Sonia, in the 2002 documentary Biggie and Tupac, had gone on to describe that Perez was alleged to have used her in supplying her to other cops in group explicit activity, which her lawyer Marshall Bitcower alleged Perez had secretly filmed.
Has anybody ever filmed any of these stories you told us about with police officers?
Sonia in a documentary had told Nick Broomfield that between the ages of 14 and 19, Perez was alleged to have gotten her to bring her young girlfriends to nightclubs where they would be intoxicated, then were alleged to have been taken to an apartment on Marathon Street where the group activities with numerous other cops were alleged to have occurred, which according to her lawyer had been secretly filmed.
So tell me about this with the other police officer.
We would go to, after going to a nightclub, getting drunk, getting high, we would go to the apartment and we would just have, my friend with one of his partners.
And they shared you?
They saw tapes or videos.
Perez may be insinuated as alleged to have been running a blackmail operation or voyeurism program based on the claims. Perez was also reported as starting one of these relationships with the LAPD chief Bernard Park's daughter.
How the LAPD was able to suppress this case, what did they really use on the FBI to back them off the first time? Certainly, the connection between Bernard Park's daughter, Michelle, and this whole case there's still a lot more there.
Sonia had further told the FBI she was alleged to have witnessed Perez and Mack take out a Mexican gang member and his elderly mother. She claimed to have been with them in 1994 where they were alleged to have committed the acts in a Bellevue Avenue apartment, to which she alleged they had wrapped up their bodies in garbage bags and duct tape and had then dumped them in a ravine in Tijuana, Mexico. The specific dumping spot was a hot spot for disposal by the cartels in the narco wars. This is not the only homicide she had alleged to have witnessed the cops carry out, as she had gone on to claim Perez was alleged to have shown her a body in a trunk of a young Hispanic club dancer who she claimed Perez was alleged to have taken out. The Mexican authorities, through the request of the FBI, had located the ravine and excavated it, being in a search to look for the alleged bodies the cops had dumped. No remains had been found and Sonia Flores had been sentenced under claims of lying to the FBI. These were just some of the claims made against the cops during the Rampart investigation. Rafael Perez had joined the Rampart division in 1995. Officer Nino Durden had then replaced David Mack as his police partner. Perez was reported as belonging to a clique of 5 officers of the Rampart division. Kenneth Bogney, in the 2021 documentary Last Man Standing, would implicate the 5 officers as alleged to have been behind the orchestration of the Biggie murder and had gone on to name them as Rafael Perez, David Mack, Nino Durden, Kevin Gaines, and Sammy Martin.
Which officers are you saying were implicated in the murder of Biggie Smalls?
David Mack, Sammy Martin, Durden. You had one other officer that was involved in it, and I keep forgetting his name. He was Kevin Gaines. So it's 5 officers that was involved in a planning that was helped execute
Sammy Martin was a detective trainee in the Rampart division who had been the godfather to David Mack's children. David Mack had also become a Rampart officer. Kevin Gaines was a member of the Crash Unit, which stood for the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. Rafael Perez would also join the Crash Unit, being an anti-gang unit. The division had served areas west of downtown Los Angeles. Members including Perez shared tattoos on their arms of the Crash logo, which had been a skull with playing cards behind it. The cards included in the Crash logo are a set known as the Dead Man's Hand. Rafael Perez had described to investigators a system of trophies the cops had attached to the logo, which he had described had been handed out as awards to fellow cops. Red playing cards were handed out to officers when they had achieved woundings on duty, while black playing cards were handed out when they had achieved killings.
We give plaques out when you get involved in shootings. If the guy dies, the card is black number 2. If he stayed alive, it's a red number 2.
Is it more prestigious to get one that's black than red?
I'm assuming so. I mean, yeah. I mean, you know, the black one signifies that the guy died. The red one means it was a hit, but not fatal.
Perez had been arrested in 1998 after an internal affairs investigation had discovered that he had been stealing out the evidence locker. Perez had then agreed to cooperate with the authorities and revealed the Rampart corruption scandal for a reduced sentence. 70 officers had been implicated in misconduct, which had caused over 100 criminal convictions to be overturned. Rampart Crash officers were found as stealing out the evidence locker, planting and falsifying evidence, committing perjury in court, and a whole host of other offences which had caused hundreds of false convictions. The city then had to pay settlements of up to $125 million, being to those who were affected by the scandal. Perez received immunity from prosecution on any crime other than murder. Perez had said 90% of the Crash officers had been in the loop and were knowingly framing civilians and suspected gang members and perjuring themselves on the witness stand. Perez claimed his superiors were aware of and encouraged Crash officers to carry out the misconduct, as the goal of the unit had been to arrest gang members by any means necessary.
There's a thing called being in the loop, being involved. I would say that 90% of the officers that work Crash, and not just Rampart Crash, falsify a lot of information. They put cases on people. And I know that's not a good thing to hear, but there's a lot of crooked stuff going on with LAPD, especially LAPD specialized units.
Perez was sentenced to 5 years in prison but had only served a year, where he was alleged to have told Bogney about the division's ties into Death Row Records. Kenneth Bogney had told LAPD officer Cliff Armas in November of 2000 that Perez was alleged to have told him that the Rampart division had provided security for Death Row Records. Death Row Records had been a West Coast label headed by Suge Knight. The classified FBI files report a connection between Death Row and the Rampart division going back to 1993. Kevin Gaines had been murdered by a fellow cop 9 days after the Biggie incident. The investigation into the case revealed the truck he had been found in and his place of residence had been in the name of Sharifa Knight, who had been the ex-wife of Suge Knight. Sharifa had been in control of Nightlife Management, which managed Death Row artists such as Snoop Dogg. The FBI files outline that Sharifa Knight had been having an affair with Kevin Gaines dating back to 1993, as the files claim they had been found as living together at the time. The files also outline Kevin Gaines as a possible suspect of missing evidence in Snoop Dogg's 1993 murder case, which had gone on to have gotten Snoop Dogg an acquittal. Snoop Dogg had been involved in the murder of 20-year-old Philip Holdemariam in 1993. The evidence, including shell casings and clothing, had been booked into the LAPD Pacific Division's evidence locker, which had then gone missing. Kevin Gaines had dominion over the locker at the time, as it had then been a division he had worked at.
Attorney Johnny Cochran has said evidence in this trial is, quote, going to be a problem again. Part of that problem is the fact that the LAPD accidentally destroyed evidence against Snoop Doggy Dogg and the others.
Reggie Wright Jr. had been a former Compton cop who had become Death Row's head of security. Suge Knight loaned him $300,000 to begin Right Way's protective services, which had begun providing Death Row with cop security. After a TV show claimed to have discovered checks written from Death Row to Kevin Gaines inside Gaines's gym bag after his passing, Reggie Wright Jr. had questioned Sharifa Knight about it in recorded audio. She claimed never to have cut checks to Kevin Gaines, but did admit that Gaines was hiring his cop associates to provide security for Snoop Dogg, who she claimed would always pay them in cash. LAPD Detective Russell Paul's investigation into the Rampart cops' connection into death row had claimed that the cops which Gaines was alleged to have been recruiting had been being paid in cash at $75 per hour. Former Rampart Captain Rich Mears had claimed in the podcast Game of Crimes that Kevin Gaines had been found with 7 different credit cards registered to death row.
When they did the investigation, he had 7 major credit cards from death row records in his wallet.
The captain further claimed that Gaines was found to have been recruiting officers from various different departments in order to provide security for death row.
Kevin Gaines, on the other hand, was very intimately involved with death row records. He was involved in actually hiring off-duty cops to work for death row records, not only from LAPD, but Inglewood PD, Compton PD, Sheriff's Department.
Bogey would allege that Perez had told him that the Rampart cops who were associated to death row would go on to be responsible for taking out Biggie. Bogey claimed Perez was alleged to have told him how the Rampart cops had been contracted to kill Biggie under the motive of it being revenge. There are 2 main theories under the cop involvement's narrative, one being a revenge motive and the other being a takeover motive. The revenge motive, which Bogey claimed Perez had expressed to him, had been that Biggie was targeted in response to the death of death row artist Tupac, which had occurred 6 months before the Biggie incident. Biggie's label boss Puffy of New York record company Bad Boy was said to have been soliciting unpaid enforcement from the Southside Compton Crips beginning in 1995, being whenever Bad Boy would be on the West Coast. Southside Compton Crips shot caller Dwayne Davis claimed this had begun after the August 1995 Source Awards, where Suge Knight had dissed Puffy on stage. Suge Knight also had a cardboard cutout of Tupac placed within Death Row set design at the event, being as Suge Knight was aware that Tupac was going to be released from prison in October of 1995, and then begin to make music with Death Row. Tupac had been in prison from a case on the East Coast which had also been tied into a 1994 robbery on him, with Biggie and Puffy being associated to the robbery as they were at the location when it had occurred, which had gone on to cause what was termed as the East Coast West Coast beef. While Tupac was in prison, inmates began to tell him that Biggie's homeboys had set him up. Suge Knight's best friend and enforcer Jake Robles had been shot and killed at a party after getting into an argument with Puffy's bodyguard Anthony Wolf Jones. Death Row artists The Dog Pound and Snoop Dogg had their trailer shot up in New York while filming a music video after Biggie had told DJ Funk Flex to announce their location on the radio. Death Row and Bad Boy had numerous run-ins with each other, which included the Southside Compton Crips, with one such incident occurring at the 1996 Soul Train Awards. The Southside Compton Crips had been placed against the Compton Mob Pyrus, who Suge Knight was associated with, being due to the East Coast West Coast beef between the labels. Suge Knight also had Tupac put on as MOB Pyru. Tupac had put out the infamous diss song Hit 'Em Up towards Biggie and Puffy in the summer of 1996. Dwayne Davis in a Tape Police interview alleged that Puffy had met him at the Greenblatt Deli in Los Angeles following the release of Hit 'Em Up, where Davis alleged Puffy contracted $1 million hit to the Crips on the heads of Suge Knight and Tupac. A Compton police report detailing a rumor of Puffy putting a bounty on Death Row chains to the Crips had caused Southside Compton Crip Orlando Anderson to attempt with stealing Compton Mob Pyru Trayvon Lane's chain in July of 1996. Tupac and Suge Knight with the Compton MOB Pyrus then had a run-in with Orlando Anderson in Las Vegas in September of 1996, where they had been caught on tape jumping him. Dwayne Davis in a recorded police interview claimed after his nephew Orlando Anderson had been jumped, he had assisted him with carrying out the drive-by on Tupac and Suge Knight, with the intention of claiming the $1 million bounty from Puffy. The revenge motive outlines that the cops had then been contracted to take out Biggie due to the East Coast West Coast beef. The takeover motive, on the other hand, alleges that the Rampart cops, in cooperation with their ties into Death Row, had actually have been the ones behind the Tupac and Suge Knight incident. Suge Knight, in a 2018 prison interview with author Michael Douglas Carlin, had claimed it had actually have been Rafael Perez and his crew who had carried out the shooting, with him saying it hadn't been Orlando Anderson.
And the sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? It's fantastic, not at all. Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too.
The takeover motive alleges Biggie had been taken out to cover up the cops' hit on Tupac and to reinforce the gang narrative. Bogey would reveal the details Perez was alleged to have told him about the contract taken out on Biggie. Bogey would tell the LAPD in November of 2000 that Perez was alleged to have told him how the contract had not only have been for Biggie. Bogey claimed that during the time of Suge Knight's incarceration, which had begun in October of 1996, David Mack had got information to do what the boss wanted done. Bogey never clarified who the term the boss was referring to.
Right after Tupac was killed, word it came down that Mac was to find somebody to take care of what the boss wanted done.
Bogey would claim Perez was alleged to have told him how there had been $1 million hit given to the Rampart cops, being on the heads of both Biggie and Puffy.
Did he tell you who the target was?
Yeah, he told me target was Biggie and Puffy.
Was it one or the other or both?
It was both.
Bogey would allege to have been told that the cops had been paid $250,000 up front in order to begin with planning the hit.
He said at some death row security meetings that they had met with Reggie White and Dave Kenner. Dave Kenner gave a message to Reggie White for Mac, specifically to take care of something. He didn't say what he said, find somebody to take care of everything. So evidently they found Muhammad. They had gave Muhammad some money up front. I'm not sure how much, I think $200,000 from Suge, supposed to be Suge. He never mentioned Suge's name. I gotta say that. They never mentioned his name. They called him the boss.
An inmate called Mark Hyland, who featured in the 2002 Biggie and Tupac documentary, had been given federal immunity by the FBI in cooperating with them to talk about the Rampart scandal. Hyland had stated he had worked as the Rampart cops' bookkeeper and had been assisting them with laundering money through real estate. He had told the FBI he was alleged to have assisted the cops with transporting a portion of the money which was secured for the Biggie hit. He had claimed in the Biggie and Tupac documentary that he had met the cops at Fritz's Gentleman's Club in Bellflower, Los Angeles, where he had alleged to have seen Rafael Perez, David Mack and Nino Durden, who were alleged to have been discussing the planning for the hit on Biggie.
Several LAPD officers, including Rafael Perez, Nino Durden, and David Mack, were at Fritz's in Bellflower, which is a gentleman's club. In a nutshell, there was a hit taken out on Notorious B.I.G. They were talking about planning on how to get the monies and the weapons together. At that point, my jaw about dropped, realizing that, yeah, there's a lot of booze going around here and a lot of drugs going around, but these guys seem very serious.
Hyland would go on to tell the FBI that he was alleged to have met up with Rafael Perez in a parking lot of a Denny's in Bellflower, where Perez was alleged to have given him an envelope full of money. Hyland stated his job was to travel to Arizona and give the payment to a cop who he claimed had gone on to provide the murder weapon used in the Biggie case.
I transported monies interstate between Los Angeles and Phoenix to arrange the hit on Biggie Small.
The FBI had matched flight tickets and hotel receipts with Mark Hyland's claims, which revealed he had traveled to Arizona during the time he claimed. The murder weapon was then alleged to have been taken back to Los Angeles, where Bogey claimed it was alleged to have been given to Amir Muhammad. Amir Muhammad had gone to college with David Mack and was the godparent to Mack's kids. Bogey alleged that Perez had told him how Mack was alleged to have contracted Amir Muhammad to act as one of the hitmen, in alleging he had already have been carrying out hits for the Nation of Islam. A secondary hitman had been left over out of the 5 officers, which based on Boagny's claims would have left either Nino Durden or Sammy Martin. The claims indicate that Amir Muhammad was alleged to have been the hitman for Puffy, while one of the remaining officers was selected for Biggie.
There were 2 cars set up, so depending on which way the caravan that had Puff and Biggie in it, whichever way they turned, there was going to be a car that was going to be there that had a shooter that was going to be able to take out, whether it be Puff or whether it be Biggie. So right there it tells you there was more than one shooter.
Bogey went on to reveal the alleged tactics the cops had used to pull it off. Bogey would further tell the LAPD that Perez was alleged to have told him the tactics the cops had put into the planning of the hit.
They had been stalking Biggie and his whole crew. They had been watching him and stalking and stuff like that. I say stalking, but that's not his words. Those are mine. I say stalking because when you watch somebody to kill him, I think you're stalking. I think you made him pray. That's just me.
And he said Mac, prior to that night, had been following Biggie and seeing where he was going.
Yeah.
Biggie had arrived in Los Angeles in late February of 1997, being on an early press tour for his upcoming album Life After Death. Puffy, who had been the person who had scheduled the trip, had then joined him shortly after. Bogey had told journalist Don Sikorsky on the Dossier podcast that the cops were alleged to have used private investigator Anthony Pellicano to spy on Biggie when he had arrived in Los Angeles to go towards the orchestration of the hit.
Anthony Pellicano, that Perez and Mac use and Sugar them use on a regular basis. He got all this information from them guys, how to find people and stuff like that, and they used them. Mrs. Wallace had the right to know that the LAPD played a part in killing her son.
Anthony Pellicano was an infamous private investigator and Hollywood fixer who had become a convicted criminal, being found as illegally wiretapping celebrities' phones as part of his work. Bogey would further outline the alleged tactics used by the cops, as he had detailed each cop's alleged role in the hit. Biggie and Puffy had been attending a Vibe magazine after party in the Peterson Automotive Museum prior to the incident. Bogey, in the 2022 miniseries Who Killed Biggie and Tupac, had alleged that Perez had told him that Perez's role in the hit had been to stalk Biggie and Puffy in the party and relay information of their whereabouts to David Mack over a cell phone.
The night of the actual murder, David Mack told him to keep his eye on Notorious B.I.G. and Sean Puffy Combs. And when they got up or they made any type of move, he was to alert David Mack.
The FBI reports on the Biggie case had claimed witnesses had seen the cops at the party using cell phones prior to the hit taking place. Bogey had alleged David Mack was using the information from Perez to relay it to Amir Muhammad and the other cops. Russell Poole in his investigation had claimed evidence had pointed towards that the information was being relayed between the cops by using walkie-talkies. He had further believed they had been monitoring police frequencies to carry out the hit.
Why haven't these cases been solved? One reason that they were well orchestrated, well planned out, radios being used, communication, and had to be experienced police officers knew exactly what to do.
Reports further state a person had discharged a firearm on the opposite side of the museum, which had drawn the authorities away from where Biggie and Puffy were at. Bogey had claimed that Kevin Gaines' alleged role in the plot was to be an interceptor, as he was supposed to cut off both Biggie and Puffy's cars so Amir Muhammad and the remaining cop could carry out the double hit.
Gaines was supposed to cut both of them off, the officer Gaines. A lot of people don't know that Gaines was seriously involved in this. He was supposed to cut both vehicles off and the other guy come around and shoot him.
The murder weapon which Mark Hyland alleged had been provided by law enforcement in Arizona, which had been taken back to Los Angeles, had been loaded with armor-piercing gecko ammo, which had been in preparation just in case the targets had been wearing bulletproof vests. Bogey would further describe how the cops would go on to botch the hit, only partially completing it. FBI informant Mario Hammond had given further information about the tactics, being in a deposition he had given at the request of Biggie's family. He claimed the cops were alleged to have been given assistance by two females who had infiltrated Biggie's camp in LA. Biggie was reported as being around two females in the party who were attempting to lead him somewhere to go and smoke with them. Initial reports had stated that this had been Death Row artist Jewel and Suge Knight's cousin Lachelle who had greeted Biggie at the party. However, they had denied any involvement in an Art of Dialogue interview. The Vibe party had been closed by the fire department shortly after midnight. Biggie and Puffy had then waited outside while Inglewood police officers who had been supplying their security had retrieved their trucks. Puffy's bodyguard Gene Dill had identified Amir Muhammad from a photo lineup in the 2002 Biggie and Tupac documentary as approaching Puffy outside the museum during this time. Gene Dill had then brandished his gun at who he claimed had been Amir Muhammad, who was dressed in a suit and bow tie similar to a Nation of Islam uniform. Gene reported who he said was Amir Muhammad as walking away into the direction of where the suspect's vehicle had been placed. Gene had also identified a black SS Chevy Impala waiting on the corner of the intersection outside the museum, which is where he claimed Amir Muhammad had walked off to following the confrontation. Gene Dill, who had rode in the lead truck with Puffy, had told their driver, Inglewood police officer Kenneth Story, to run the red light. Based on Bogey's claims, this action had saved Puffy's life, as it had caused Kevin Gaines to fail with intercepting the vehicles. A white Toyota Land Cruiser had been reported as failing to intercept the convoy, which was believed to have been Kevin Gaines. Biggie and artist Lil C's were in the middle car, with Lil C's reporting that during this time the two girls from the party had been distracting Biggie by keeping him idle on the street talking out the window. Biggie's truck had then stopped at the lights where the black SS Chevy Impala had been waiting on the corner, and the white Toyota Land Cruiser had then pulled up in the 3-lane besides Biggie's, boxing him in. A person in the black SS Chevy Impala had then opened fire into Biggie's vehicle, hitting him 4 times. Kenneth Bogney in the 2022 Who Killed Biggie and Tupac series had described what Perez had told him the communication had been just before the hit had taken place.
Notorious B.I.G. and Sean Combs got up to leave. Perez called Mac and told Mac they were going to their cars. He said he received a call from Mac about 5 minutes later telling him to get out of the way. And he said that's when all hell broke loose.
Gene Dill had described there being a brief hesitation before the shooting, which would corroborate the claims of it being a botched double hit, as it could indicate that who was alleged to have been Amir Muhammad had to then get the go-ahead to take out Biggie after the failure by Kevin Gaines to intercept the convoy. Lil C's had described the suspect as wearing a suit and bow tie similar to the Nation of Islam. People draw comparisons between the suspect's sketch and Amir Muhammad. FBI agent Phil Carson in the 2022 series Who Killed Biggie and Tupac had claimed that an LAPD log had showed that Rafael Perez had been present on the crime scene of the Biggie shooting, appearing in the log as a responding officer where he had been handling shell casings.
Rafael Perez was seen picking up shell casings and actually is on a log as an LAPD officer on site.
Perez, therefore, based on Bogney's claims, would have had to have kept his LAPD uniform stashed close by in order to go and change into it following the hit, to then have an alibi as being a responding officer to the incident. Phil Carson had further revealed in a series that some of the 23 people who had travelled with Biggie and Puffy to the Peterson Automotive Museum had been in police reports as identifying David Mack as being at the entrance of the museum when they were entering.
David Mack was identified by witnesses who were part of Biggie's entourage, saw David Mack at the entrance when they went inside with Biggie.
News footage of the crime scene had been captured outside the museum following the incident. Some believe David Mack and Kevin Gaines had been spotted on tape outside the entrance in plain clothes. Bogney would go on to tell the LAPD that Perez was alleged to have told him that after Perez had removed himself from the crime scene, he had then pulled an all-nighter and visited Biggie's body in the morgue between 1 a.m. and 7 a.m.
I told him, I said, why don't you check out and see if he signed his name on the log about going to see the B.I.G.'s body, whenever it was in the morgue. He came back maybe about a week later and said, hey man, you were correct. He did sign it on the morgue. I can't believe he told you that.
Why did he say he went to the morgue? Why would he go to the morgue?
He just wants to see the body.
Biggie's autopsy report lists LAPD Wilshire Division detectives Balderrama and Chavez as being present at the morgue during the autopsy. The report shows the autopsy had started 7 hours after his death had been officially pronounced, meaning Perez would have been there during this time if the claims are accurate. Photos of Biggie in the morgue had also have been captured, which had then been given to PBS, which were included in their show called Frontline in an episode called LAPD Blues. Following the hit, the suspect had been reported as laying low in a safe house, and Kevin Gaines had been murdered by a fellow cop. The Wilshire Department had taken on the Biggie investigation in the immediate aftermath. Detective Russell Poole, who had been on the investigation, had reported how the very first clue they had gotten in the aftermath had been a tip that LAPD officer Kevin Gaines may have been involved in the Biggie incident. 9 days after the Biggie murder, Kevin Gaines had been killed by a fellow cop at a gas station. Kevin Gaines had been killed by fellow cop Frank Liger in an apparent road rage incident. Liger had been cleared for the murder but had been fired from the LAPD in 2014 due to comments he had made about the case. While giving a speech at the LA Police Academy, Liger had been recorded on audio saying he had no regrets in killing Kevin Gaines, and further stated he would murder a van full of his type if given a chance.
Carl Douglas hit me up. He goes, did you intend to shoot him? I said, I hit him, didn't I? He goes, well, it wasn't an accident. No, it wasn't an accident. He goes, do you have any regrets? I says, yeah. And he leans forward again. He goes, you regret shooting him? I says, no, I regret that he's alone in the truck at the time. I could have killed a whole truckload of them and would have been happily doing so.
A memo written by an assistant officer to LAPD Chief L. Pasinger in relation to the controversy the audio had caused had reported that Frank Liger had once threatened to reveal to the media in 1997 that the shooting of fellow cop Kevin Gaines was, quote, a sanctioned hit on Gaines by LAPD. The Chaos Merchants book further looked into this, with it reading, quote, Gaines was gunned down by Officer Frank Liger, who later said the murder was a sanctioned hit ordered by LAPD brass, specifically Police Chief Bernard Parks, unquote. As the Wilshire Division's very first tip in the immediate aftermath had been that Kevin Gaines' name had been associated to the hit, it's been argued he had to have been taken out in a cover-up.
After the Biggie's killing took place, a couple of days went by. They were at Death Row Security Office, and Mac and Reggie White was just on fire. I mean, they were mad as hell. They were, they were just upset. And then when Gaines came to the meeting, Mac attacked him. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. Gaines was supposed to cut off Puff Daddy and Biggie at the same, cut off both cars.
Detectives who had arrested Rafael Perez in 1998 for stealing out the evidence locker theorized Perez was going to use the evidence to frame Frank Liger for killing Kevin Gaines. The investigation into Gaines's death would reveal his connection into Sharifa Knight and Death Row Records. More inmates would come forward in providing further information of what had occurred in the immediate aftermath. Minister Louis Farrakhan, the head of the Nation of Islam, had held a hip-hop peace summit shortly after the Biggie murder, which had taken place at their Chicago headquarters.
Dozens of other big names from the hip-hop industry attended a so-called hip-hop peace summit.
An inmate and Nation of Islam member called Clayton Hill had alleged in 2011 that behind the scenes at the headquarters, high-ranking officials within the nation were alleged to have helped Amir Muhammad with disposing the murder weapon. Clayton Hill would come forward in 2011 in claiming he had been involved in the Biggie case, being as a result of being a member of the Nation of Islam. Hill had alleged he was responsible for assisting Amir Muhammad with disposing the murder weapon, which had been a 9mm blue steel pistol. Clayton Hill claimed to have been instructed by Minister Tony Muhammad, the Western Regional Minister of the nation, in mid-May of 1997, to go and pick up an individual from the Greyhound bus station in Atlanta who had been coming from Los Angeles. Clayton Hill had claimed he had picked up a person using the name of Dawood Muhammad, who he would go on to identify as Amir Muhammad. According to Clayton Hill, Amir Muhammad had stayed in a safe house for 6 weeks to lay low following the incident, where he was then alleged to have travelled to Atlanta and had been picked up by Clayton Hill. Clayton Hill had alleged Amir Muhammad had retrieved the weapon from a garbage bag and had told him he had been on the run and was associated to the Pyrus in Los Angeles. Clayton Hill claimed to have passed the weapon on to Amir Muhammad, the personal driver of Louis Farrakhan, who he claimed had then taken it to a high-ranking official within the nation's Chicago headquarters. FBI informant Mario Hammonds, in his deposition in the San Quentin prison by lawyer Rob Frank, had identified Amir Muhammad as being with David Mack and Suge Knight around Death Row Records.
You know who Suge Knight is, right?
Yes, I do.
And how do you know who Suge Knight is?
Through our association with him.
And how did you meet Mr. Muhammad?
In L.A., in Las Vegas.
And was Mr. Muhammad with David Mack at that time?
Yes.
And is that how you know who Mr. Muhammad is?
That's the only way I know. That is the only way I know.
David Mack would go on to carry out a bank robbery shortly after, which Kenneth Bogney claimed had been carried out to pay the remaining amount to Amir Muhammad. David Mack, in November of 1997, had been caught on surveillance cameras robbing a Bank of America. Mack had carried it out using a Mac 11 and had been accompanied by 2 unidentified suspects. Investigators had come to find that the robbery had been an inside job. David Mack had been cheating on his wife with a 19-year-old called Erilyn Romero who worked at the bank. The cops were found to have had a string of young females which were believed to have been involved in a situation Sonia Flores had described, who the cops had been using in their alleged criminality. This may have included the 2 unidentified girls which were reported by FBI informant Mario Hammonds as alleged to have assisted in the Biggie hit. Erilyn Romero had scheduled maximum capacity standing cash to be delivered to the bank, with it equating to $722,000. Mack had been seen on CCTV carrying the cash out in the bags it had just been delivered in. The detectives investigating the case have found the bank worker's role as suspicious in the plot, to which they had gone on to question her, and she had given them a contact card for David Mack. David Mack had 2 other assailants in a robbery who are unidentified. Bogey claimed Perez had told him it had been Perez and Sammy Martin, with him also claiming to have been told Kevin Gaines was supposed to go on the robbery but had been murdered beforehand.
He had made a big scene at the police station where he worked at, so everybody could see him. That was his alibi. He was the driver in the bank robbery. Gaines was supposed to be with him on the bank robbery, but he ended up getting killed on the freeway. And then another officer stepped in his place, Sammy Martin.
When Rafael Perez was arrested in 1998, he had been reported as first asking the detectives if it had been about the bank robbery. As Sammy Martin was alleged to have been on the bank robbery according to Bogey, this could outline him as the possible secondary shooter out of the remaining cops, who was originally supposed to kill Biggie before the hit had been botched by Kevin Gaines. The assailant's assistance in the robbery had been detailed in police reports. One of the suspects had stolen a Ford Windstar van from the budget rent-a-car agency near LAX airport, which had gone on to have been used as the getaway vehicle in the robbery. Inside the bank, one of the unidentified suspects posing as a customer had gone on to hold a security guard at gunpoint. The remaining suspect had stayed in the van as the getaway driver. A diagram can be created based on Kenneth Bogey's claims. 2 days after the bank robbery, David Mack, Rafael Perez and Sammy Martin, along with LAPD Chief Bernard Park's daughter, had been reported as traveling to Las Vegas. The cops had been documented as gambling $25,000 while there. Bogey had claimed Perez had told him how the trip's purpose was to go and meet Amir Muhammad in order to give him the remaining $700,000 which wasn't given over, being due to the botched hit which had taken place.
Mac and Perez did the bank job in order to pay Amir because he was going to go after them.
And they were scared of Amir Muhammad because Amir was a contract killer.
Absolutely. See, a lot of people don't know that Sammy Martin was with Rafael Perez and David Mack in Vegas a couple of days after the bank robbery. And that's why they sent Amir to Payne.
The money from the bank robbery had never been recovered by the police. Evidence would be found against Mack which would connect him into the Biggie case. After Erilyn Romero had given detectives the name of David Mack, which had been a month after the bank robbery, the detectives would track down David Mack and make an arrest. On December 16th, 1997 at 7:20 p.m., 4 detectives had tracked down David Mack to a supermarket close to his home. They had arrested him outside the supermarket without incident. David Mack was found to have had the same weapon type used in the Biggie incident on his person. The police had gone on to search David Mack's home in relation to the bank robbery. While at the home in the garage, they had discovered a black SS Chevy Impala with chrome wheels, which had matched the description of the suspect's vehicle in a Biggie case. Next to the car in the garage, investigators had found what they had described as a shrine to Tupac. In search for the missing money, detectives had used radar-penetrating technology on David Mack's walls and floorboards, where they would go on to find the same Gecko 9mm armor-piercing bullets used in the Biggie case buried underneath the floorboards. The ammo is usually sold to police departments through military surplus sales. They had also found a collection of numerous 9mm blue steel pistols, which had been the same type used in the Biggie crime. The FBI and LAPD had ballistics tests carried out on each firearm found at the property, with the report being concluded in 1998, revealing none of the weapons matched shell casings found at the Biggie scene. Based on Clayton Hill's claims, this had been because the alleged murder weapon had been disposed of at the Nation of Islam Chicago headquarters. At Mack's property, several tactical items had been found, such as police scanners and radios. Russell Paul would theorize that the equipment had been used in the Biggie hit. David Mack had been charged with conspiracy to commit bank robbery, armed bank robbery, and using and carrying a firearm during a crime of violence. Mack had been sentenced to 14 years in prison. During David Mack's trial, it had been discovered that he had shared the same attorney as Death Row Records lawyer David Kenner, with him being questioned on during a deposition if his attorney Donald M. Ray had been funneling money from David Kenner through Death Row Records in order to pay for Mack's legal fees. David Mack would begin with showing allegiance to the Piru Street Gang once he had been incarcerated. David Mack, once arrested, had been placed in the Montebello City Jail. The 2001 PBS series Frontline, in an episode called LAPD Blues, had reported on how other inmates had claimed that David Mack had denounced his ties to the LAPD and had begun to profess that he was a member of the Piru Street Gang.
David Mack, renouncing the LAPD and coming out as a blood gang member.
He's in custody, Los Angeles County Jail, and we're getting reports back that he is attiring himself with red socks, red items that distinguish association with the blood gang. And we'd also received word from jailers that he had said he is a blood.
In an interview with Detective Greg Grant, David Mack had acknowledged himself as a Muslim and had revealed to have lived in the same Compton neighborhood as Suge Knight. David Mack's friends had told the detective that David Mack had numerous associates of the Compton mob Piru. David Mack had been pictured in a red suit and hat alongside Rafael Perez and Sammy Martin while on vacation at Lake Tahoe. Mack and Perez were also pictured wearing all red, with the chief of police Bernard Park's daughter standing with a cake which read "Bloods Rule." Just a few days into Mack's jail stay, the visiting list reported the one and only person who had visited him had been Amir Muhammad. Amir Muhammad had put down a fake social security number on the log. LAPD cop Greg Kading argues that Amir Muhammad had done this so his identity wouldn't be stolen. FBI agent Phil Carson combats this and claims Amir Muhammad had provided false information, being in an attempt to conceal his identity and a link to David Mack.
The conspiracy theorists will use the idea that, look, he's trying to hide his identity, but it's an old friend who just happens to be associated with a bad cop because of a relationship in college.
He's not providing his information to a prison inmate. It's a login book that the wardens require to go into any prison. He's wrong. Simply put, he is wrong.
3 months after Amir Muhammad's visit, the LAPD had been investigating Rafael Perez for allegations of stealing out the evidence locker. Perez had been attached to the theft of a large quantity of narcotics, which had gone missing from the evidence locker on March 2nd, 1998. Although detectives believed the evidence was going to be used to frame Frank Liger, they had discovered it was actually being used in a street operation. Perez was found as phoning a young woman called Veronica Quesada on the day the evidence had been stolen, with her being considered as one of the young women who are alleged to have been helping the cops in their criminal enterprises. Veronica Quesada's apartment had been found to have been a cook spot for narcotics. While detectives questioned her in the apartment, Quesada's stepbrother Carlos Romero, who shared the same last name as David Mack's mistress who had assisted him with the bank robbery, had walked into the apartment and was searched by the detectives. He was found with freshly cut narcotics, which was believed to have come from the evidence stolen by Perez. Inside the apartment, detectives found a picture of Rafael Perez in what was termed as a 211 suit, with this being in reference to nylon running suits used in robberies, which corresponds to the California Penal Code 211.
Running suits would be used by a number of people that would go in and do robberies, and hence the nickname 211 suit. 211 is the section of the California Penal Code which stands for robbery. So we see a picture of Rafael Perez in this 211 suit, making hand signs that depicted a specific blood group of gangs on the West Coast.
Perez was served with a search warrant on August 6, 1998, being while he had been reporting to the Rampart captain's office. When being confronted, he was quoted as asking, "This is about the bank robbery, isn't it?" unquote. He had then been arrested 3 weeks later. Perez would then be housed with Kenneth Bogney, whose testimony was set to be used in a civil trial by Biggie's family. Kenneth Bogney in November of 2000 had told the LAPD the alleged claims Perez had told him about the Biggie case. 16 months later, in April of 2002, Biggie's estate had filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles and the LAPD. The suit was filed under Russell Paul's evidence alleging Rampart cops had been involved in the murder of Biggie. The civil suit had been for $500 million, being Biggie's estimated lifetime earnings, which would have bankrupted the LAPD. David Mack, Rafael Perez, Nino Durden and Amir Muhammad had been listed as defendants in the civil suit. The suit had pushed to add Suge Knight and Reggie Wright Jr. as defendants, but had been denied. The existing defendants, being the cops and Amir Muhammad, had gone on to have been dropped when a trial began in 2005, being at the request of the LAPD. The first civil trial had been declared as a mistrial after it had been discovered that the LAPD detective in charge of the Biggie case, being Stephen Katz, had been hiding hundreds of pages of sworn documents of Kenneth Bogney's testimony, which he had not turned over to the courts. Stephen Katz's office had been raided as a result, where the documents had been found locked away in his desk as concealing evidence. The plaintiffs won a judgment of $1.1 million paid by the LAPD to Biggie's estate due to the suppression of Kenneth Bogney's testimony, which had become known as the $1 million testimony. Bogney had requested a polygraph test for the claims he had made about Biggie, but Stephen Katz had denied it. A retrial had then occurred, which had been dismissed, with the promise that the LAPD would reinvestigate the case. The lead investigator had then been told to shut down the case 24 hours after the dismissal. The $500 million lawsuit had been dismissed in 2010 as a new investigation by a government task force had been given to the LAPD, which had gone on to remove the police involvement from the case. Former LAPD cop Greg Kading had been handed a government task force in 2008 called Wrap It Up. It had been developed in response to the civil trial to reinvestigate the case. Kading had gone through numerous case files passed down by the previous detectives, including Russell Poole. Kading had concluded that evidence put forward against the cops had been insufficient. He also believed the statements made by jailhouse informants had been unreliable. The task force had seen Dwayne Davis as a person of interest in the case, due to his prior connection into Puffy. They had gone on to set up Davis in a sting operation and had offered him either 25 years in prison or to accept a proffer agreement and be given partial immunity to discuss the case of Biggie. Davis accepted the proffer agreement and had told them he had no information to give around the Biggie case, but he could tell them about the Tupac case. The task force had then warned him if he was to comment on the Tupac case, it could not be like his prior account given to the FBI in 1998, otherwise he would go to prison. Davis in 98 had been questioned by the FBI concerning the Tupac case, where he had told them the Crips had nothing to do with it, and went on to say it had been crooked cops who had carried it out after being stiffed on money by death row. Davis this time around had told the task force that he assisted his nephew Orlando Anderson with carrying out the Tupac hit, being under $1 million bounty put forward by Puffy. The task force would tie the $1 million into a check Puffy was alleged to have given to a Harlem hustler called Eric Zip Martin, who had kept the check for himself to buy a nightclub called the Zip Code. The task force secured the Tupac confession from Dwayne Davis, and the detectives who had headed the task force would later go on to help Dwayne Davis with securing a $150,000 deal with the BET network, where Davis would appear on a BET series Death Row Chronicles and repeat the claims, with this being a violation of his proffer agreement, causing him to be arrested and charged for the Tupac case. The task force probed a different suspect in the Biggie case, being a deceased Compton Mob Piru member called Wardell Poochie Fowles. The gang member had been found as having the same car matching the description of the suspect's vehicle, which had been purchased for him by Suge Knight. The task force had falsified a confession letter written from the perspective of the deceased gang member confessing to the Biggie crime, to which they had then provided it to one of Suge Knight's ex-girlfriends who they had implicated in the letter. She had been told her kids could be taken off of her and she could go to jail if she didn't cooperate with the letter, which she believed was real. She then agreed the letter was real, although it was false and written by the task force, but it had put forward a new suspect in the Biggie case, excluding the LAPD. A judge claimed there was not enough evidence for criminal action, but it served as providing a new suspect under the Biggie case, which had fulfilled the agreement for the civil case dismissal for reinvestigation. In this video, we took a look into the claims made by inmate Kenneth Bogney. He claimed to have been the former cellmate of LAPD Rampart cop Rafael Perez and had spent a total of 8 months in the same prison together. Perez, who had once been implicated in the Biggie case, was alleged to have given details to Bogney about the Rampart cop's alleged role in the incident. The LAPD countered Bogney's claims in stating he made them up for financial gain. Don Sikorsky in a Dossier podcast had revealed that Bogney had not been accepting money for his interviews concerning the case. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, smash the thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and press that bell button so you can get all the future notifications for when I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.